As we mentioned earlier, the clock is running out on a new stimulus deal, so let's bring in CBS News political reporter Grace Segers to talk about it. Grace, good to see you. So with the clock ticking down on stimulus negotiations, where do things stand? Could we see something perhaps as early as today?
Yes, I think that congressional leaders are pretty hopeful about seeing something possibly as soon as today. We saw the four top congressional leaders, Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, and House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy meet last night, and they met for several hours. It seems like they may be able to come to a deal. We also saw last week a bipartisan, bicameral group of lawmakers come up with a $900 billion proposal that could be the basis for any future talks. So I think that, yeah, we could see something as soon as today, but the problem is that this would need to be passed by Friday because Congress wants to also pass an omnibus government spending bill before government funding runs out on December 18th.
We keep talking about sort of the clock ticking down, and the deadline is whether government funding will run out or whether the lawmakers will go off on their holiday. And to me, for regular working folks, the deadline has come and gone. Many people are just basically sort of operating on fumes right now when it comes to their finances. Seems like they have gone way past what is reasonable. You mentioned that it seems like they're making some progress with these late night meetings. I know there were some sort of sticking points that had to do with legal protection for businesses and so on and so forth. Do you know if they're sort of any closer to finding common ground on some of these more challenging issues?
Well, first of all, I think that you are completely correct in that for millions of American people, including the millions who are unemployed and struggling, yeah, the deadline has come and gone for Congress to pass something. And I think that there is a lot of frustration among ordinary Americans about why Congress hasn't been able to do something until the very last moment. But yes, there seems to be some agreement on these sticking points where Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has suggested that perhaps they set aside some of the biggest points of contention, which include state and local funding and liability shields for businesses and institutions. So it's possible that they do agree to set those issues aside and then pick them up in the next year. But these are very important issues that do need to be addressed. So even if the current legislation that they come up with doesn't address these issues, they'll probably have to discuss it again next year.
So, Grace, let me ask you about the fact that Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell finally congratulated Joe Biden for his win yesterday. I want to know if you're hearing from your sources that Senator McConnell's approval could impact the White House approval of a COVID relief package. And I'm also curious if you are, we watched Kevin McCarthy yesterday, the minority leader in the House of Representatives, literally sort of run away from reporters who asked him whether or not he agreed with Senator McConnell that Joe Biden was the president-elect of the United States. I saw Josh Hawley today on our air on CBS this morning, was asked the same question by Tony DeCopel, and really didn't give an answer. In fact, the answer that he gave was that he's waiting until January 6th. And so I just wonder if for some of these holdouts, if they're going to keep pushing the line back further and further in recognizing the president-elect. Come January 6th, could there be some Republicans who say, well, you know what, I'm waiting until January 20th, the way, we saw Stephen Miller recently on Fox News. What are you hearing?
Well, McConnell has a little bit of a safety cushion because he was just reelected in November, so he isn't exactly threatened by President Trump right now. President Trump did say in a tweet yesterday that McConnell had given up too easily, but McConnell was just reelected, and there's a very good chance that he's going to be Senate Majority Leader under President-elect Joe Biden. So he needs to start working with the new president-elect. And there's nothing really that President Trump can do about that. He could threaten to veto any relief bill that they come up with, but as previously discussed, a lot of Americans really need this relief. And if one of the president's last actions is to veto a critical relief bill, that could reflect very poorly on him and on his supporters. Now, you see from Josh Hawley and Kevin McCarthy, these are staunch supporters of the president. They are allies of his, and they need his support politically and the support of his base, which is why you see them kind of being a little bit more unwilling to acknowledge reality. But I would not expect any Republicans to really challenge the election results when votes are certified and counted on January 6th. I think that what you will see is a lot of complaining, maybe some grumbling until then. But on January 6th itself, I think you are going to see lawmakers acknowledge the reality that there is a new president-elect, and they're going to have to start working with him.
Wait, can I just follow up on that, Anne-Marie, real quick? Grace, so on January 6th, could we see some House members, though, voicing their opposition to this? And maybe you can explain to our audience. I mean, Senator McConnell, by getting on the Senate floor yesterday and acknowledging that Biden is the president-elect, is sending a signal, certainly, to the Republican members of the United States Senate and perhaps even those in the House. But up until yesterday, he's been playing sort of this game where, he didn't want to acknowledge that President-elect Biden was the president-elect because of that race that is happening in Georgia. So on one hand, he's sort of fueling the fire, but yesterday he's trying to put out the fire. He's trying to signal to Republicans, come January 6th, please don't support this movement by some House Republicans that is underway, which you hear on social media and in front of the cameras, that they are going to protest this election. And so maybe you can sort of break that down, sort of the political chess game that McConnell is trying to play here.
I mean, he is walking a very delicate line right now because, as you mentioned, there are two very critical runoff elections in Georgia that will determine control of the Senate. So he really wants voters in Georgia to support both the Republican candidates on the January 5th runoff. But problem with that is that a lot of these voters believe that the November election was rigged, and they're very strong supporters of the president. So McConnell needs to somehow convince voters that the election was not rigged and that they also need to turn out in January to be a check on the incoming president-elect. So he's playing that political game right now, and it's very difficult for him. And meanwhile, as you said, we are seeing some other House members saying that they could possibly challenge the results on January 6th. But the problem is, if a House member wanted to challenge the results in a state, they would have to be joined by a senator. And I think that while it's likely that we could see some Republican House members try to challenge these results, I think it's less likely that we would see a senator join them. We saw over 100 House lawmakers, Republican lawmakers, join a lawsuit from the Texas Attorney General trying to overturn the election results in 4 states. This case was dismissed by the Supreme Court, but I think we're seeing House Republicans are more likely to object to the election results. But Senate Republicans are, for the most part, being more pragmatic because they understand that there's a really important election coming up.
So to that point, Vlad mentioned that Senator Josh Hawley was on CBS this morning. He's from Missouri. He was asked specifically about this and whether or not he would have any objections. Let's play some of that sound.
I'm studying what's been done in the past, Tony. After the 2004 election and 2016, Democrats raised concerns both in the House and the Senate. This is really the only forum that the Constitution and the laws give to senators and to congresspeople the opportunity to raise concerns about the election. So I'm reading what's been done in the past. We've got a hearing today in the United States Senate on the election. So we'll see.
Very vague there. Clearly, some of these lawmakers feel that there is something beneficial to at least giving the appearance of maintaining their fight along with the president. If some feel that it is beneficial, why does Mitch McConnell feel that it would be detrimental?
So again, I really think this all comes back to Georgia right now, because the Georgia runoff elections are on January 5th, which is the day before January 6th, the counting and the certification happens. So he really wants to make sure that Republicans maintain control in the Senate. And if they do, maybe that could change the calculation on January 6th. But for right now, he's telling his caucus, his conference, don't rock the boat. Don't do anything that could make it more difficult for us to win these elections. And I think you see with Senator Hawley, he is a very staunch supporter of the president. So for him, it would not look very good to his supporters if he suddenly backtracked. So of course he's going to stay vague and say, well, maybe we'll see what happens. But I would sincerely doubt that come January 6th, he would actually do something to challenge. Of course, you can hold those words against me if I am incorrect and he actually does challenge.
Sounds like,
Well, we'll have you right back on here, Grace, to explain yourself.
It definitely sounds like, I don't know, Grace, it often feels as if those Republicans who are sort of playing this game, it is a game, because the reality is that Joe Biden is the president-elect of the United States, are thinking about 2024. And you're going to need those Trump supporters if, for example, you are Senator Josh Hawley who decides to run for president, or if you are a Secretary of State Mike Pompeo who decides to run for president. As you say, Mitch McConnell, he's been reelected. He hopes that he will remain the Senate Majority Leader. Not a lot of skin in the game other than hoping that the Georgia runoff goes his way, right? But it does strike me that some of these folks that are playing this game are keeping an eye on holding on to that base that President Trump has by placating him, by sort of feeding into his fantasy that somehow he won the election, and that is that they're not losing anything over
proposition.
Yeah.
It's such a risky proposition, Vlad, because, 2024 may feel like right around the corner for some people, but it's also a long way off. And man, I think that we've seen the twists and turns in Washington, and the last 4 years have been sort of counter to, precedent in many ways. It's very difficult to, I think, predict what the next 4 years will bring, following the Trump administration, and whether or not the same supporters that helped to vote Donald Trump into office, and, an awful lot of people voted for him this time around too, whether their passion will remain as high in 4 years.
Sarah Palin had a lot of supporters, if you recall.
I would just interject very briefly that we also don't know if President Trump decides himself to run for re-election in 2024. So if he does decide to do that, that would kind of undermine what the Josh Hawleys and Mike Pompeos of the world are trying to do right now, which is capitalize on the support of President Trump's supporters. Because if he decides to run in 2024, they'd probably go flock to him instead of to Josh Hawley or Mike Pompeo or whomever else decides to run, regardless of how loyal they were to the president in 2020.
Yeah, it's a fascinating point, Grace, because, again, these Republicans who are so loyal to the president to the point of essentially embarrassing themselves, as John Bolton said yesterday on CNN, and hello, Jeff Sessions would like a word. Hello, Brian Kemp would like a word.
Right.
I mean, you throw your hat in the ring with the president of the United States, and if he does decide to run, Grace, in 2024, he won't remember that they stood in lockstep with him in 2020. He's going to attack them the same way he attacks anybody who he doesn't perceive is on his side.
I would assume so, yes, but as Anne-Marie pointed out, 2024 is a very long way away, and I think all of us, including the president, are just trying to recover from 2020 right now.
Hopefully in 2024.
I have no predictions.
I'll be able to get my driver's license.
The past 4 years broke my magic 8-ball, so all things seem unclear every time I look at that little window.
What does it
Grace,
say
thank
normally?
you so much. Great talking to you.
Does it say unclear at this moment? I can't remember what the magic 8-ball says.
I can't remember.
Check again later.
Check again later. Exactly. Thanks, Grace.
Grace, pleasure talking to you.